Protests have been going on now for some time inside Hong Kong. Now, if we believe the Western media's version of the events, we are to believe that the people of Hong Kong have just suddenly risen up against the totalitarian Chinese government. And others are a little bit more honest, and they claim that the mainland Chinese government is interfering in the local politics of Hong Kong, which is afforded certain freedoms that the mainland doesn't have. Now, the truth of the situation is a lot more complicated than this. Hong Kong has a special situation in China. It is referred to as the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region of the People's Republic of China. Hong Kong was formerly under British rule until 1997. When it rejoined, it came under the Great Reactionary Principle, one country, two systems. They have their own multi-party system and an independent judiciary which operates under common law handed down by the British Crown. It is completely capitalist. It has free trade, a service economy, and high finance. While it does have one of the highest incomes per capita of advanced countries, it also has the highest income inequality of advanced countries. Now, what this is all about is the failure of the government to bring forward the district council model. This is a piece of legislation that has attempted to reform the democratic system inside of Hong Kong, and it's something some people have wanted for a very long time. Now, this whole situation with this legislation began in 2009. The government reissued the proposals of the consultation document and the methods for selecting the chief executive and for forming the LegCo in 2012. The document proposed the enlargement of election committees, Hong Kong's Electoral College, from 800 members to 1,200 in 2012, and the expansion of the legislature from 60 to 70 seats. The 10 new legislative seats would consist of 5 geographical constituency seats and 5 functional constituency seats, to be voted in by elected district council members from among themselves. The proposals were destined for rejection by pan-Democrats once again, but a significant breakthrough occurred after the central government in Beijing accepted a counter-proposal by the Democratic Party. In particular, the pan-democracy camp was split when the proposal to elect 5 newly created functional seats was not acceptable to the 2 constituent parties. The Democratic Party sided with the government for the first time since the handover and passed the proposals with a vote of 46 to 12. So this entirely happens in the context of China actually proposing more democratic mechanisms for Hong Kong, which were eventually voted against by its own people. Now, the problem arose when the National Endowment for Democracy, a long-time running U.S. program that attempts to subvert democratic countries around the world for U.S. interests, began to get involved. And U.S. imperialism in general started to get in on this side, to try to whip up hostilities inside the country, to try to subvert the local government for U.S. imperial interests, because it became very possible because of the new democratic measures that were being offered. The thing is, the Chinese government saw this because they do know this is happening, just as many people know this is happening, and then took a measure to crack down on it in order to prevent U.S. subversion in Hong Kong. The Chinese government obviously cannot allow the democratic process to be hijacked in this way in Hong Kong. It therefore proposed an arrangement to Hong Kong's 70-person legislative council whereby the number of candidates for governor be restricted to 2 or 3, all of whom should be supported by a majority of the nominating committee modeled on the committee that appointed the present governor. The Electoral Commission must agree by a 2/3 majority to approve this change in the law. Otherwise, the old system of appointing a governor rather than electing one will remain in place. Pro-democracy people control just over 1/3 of the votes on the Electoral Commission, and may well veto the change, even though this will deprive Hong Kong of a 2017 gubernatorial election altogether. China, because of its fear of U.S. intervention that's beginning to take place, decided that only 2 or 3 people may be nominated for this position for an election. Each of these people must have a majority vote by the nomination committee for their name to appear on the ballot. Now, because of this, Occupy Central became a phenomenon. Now, despite Western claims, the Occupy Central movement is not popular among the people. In fact, polls show that only 34% of the Hong Kong population actually supports it. Now, it should be noted that 54% of the population supports real democratic reform in the country. However, the majority do not feel that this U.S.-backed movement is it. Now, some Western commentators have noticed that the Occupy Central is primarily popular, according to the polls, with two demographics: students and the very wealthy in the country. And in fact, this was even noted by the Huffington Post. In Hong Kong, the fractures largely occur along class and age lines. In a poll conducted at the end of 2013, more than 70% of respondents with a family income of less than $10,000 opposed the Occupy movement, as it did more than 80% of the respondents over 70 years old. Support for the movement was the strongest among students and those making more than $100,000 a year. Overall, that poll showed a majority of respondents opposing Occupy Central and fearing it would lead to violence and economic loss.
The people is not happy. We just want to clear the road. They don't have the right to stay there for such a long time. You understand? You just swing about in our side. What the hell are you doing for human right? For democracy? Democracy. Stupid! Democracy. Of course, we love China, but what they are doing is to damage the Hong Kong economics. That's we are worrying. You understand why we're here?
Something very significant should pop out to us right away. Since when are students and the wealthy elite on the same page? This is a very rare occurrence around the world. This is not something that happens all the time. This should, forgive the expression, raise a red flag. Now, some of the Western media, I should say most of it, are ignoring two key facts. One, there have been counter-protests to the Occupy Central, and the fact that there has been a petition to have them shut down with 1.4 million signatures on it. Now, when we consider that the population of Hong Kong is only 7 million people, we do see that this 1.4 million is a significant number. These people do oppose what they do rightly see as U.S. interference in what are the local affairs of China, and even China is well aware of this. Hong Kong affairs are China's internal affairs. All countries should respect China's sovereignty, and this is also a basic principle governing international relations. I believe for any country, for any society, no one will allow those illegal acts that violate public order. What we're experiencing is the inevitable result of allowing the capitalist class to continue. The reactionary policies brought forth by Deng Xiaoping, which began the path of the restoration of capitalism in China, is what led to this situation. When you have a country that's been historically occupied or colonialized, like China, this is something that you have to be aware is going to happen. The national bourgeois are eventually going to ally with foreign powers for their own benefit. Now let's face it, in terms of international financial capital, the United States is essentially the epicenter. So it should not be surprising that the advanced, very wealthy sections of the capitalist class would want to take a hold of it. So this is one of the problems of keeping a national bourgeois long after they should have been gotten rid of. And this is something that China does essentially have to face as being something that they did wrong. When they chose to keep capitalism, they put this forward. Now, this dragging of the students into it reeks very much of the color revolutions that we've seen in Europe and the Middle East, where some really peaceful pro-democracy group suddenly appears out of nowhere to challenge, the long-standing order inside the country. Almost always in the countries that the United States doesn't have control over. When we look into the past like this, we see something very strange with what these students are doing. These color revolutions can manifest themselves in very odd ways. For example, these students who have been taken in by all of this pro-democracy rhetoric, which is actually false, they've begun waving banners in opposition to what they call Chinese imperialism. I don't know how China can be imperialist against itself. Instead, they hold flags eagerly calling for the return to their position as occupied by the British Crown. Now, this absolutely makes no sense to me. As we always see with history, how times have changed.
Week-long street demonstrations, whipped up by pro-communist mobs, pick British Government House as their target. Posters demand the governor's resignation. Thousands of Chinese shouting Maoist slogans urge an end to British rule in the Crown Colony. The inevitable result, violence. The mobs battle police, throwing stones, bottles, anything. Both rioters and police were injured. The retaliation was swift and effective. Tear gas and riot guns loaded with wooden bullets dispersed the crowd. More than 400 arrested in the 7-day reign of terror and anarchy. Most of the hoodlums were youths. They tore up a Union Jack, smashed windows, and overturned a car, setting it on fire. A British delegation is probing the current crisis.
All of this is not to say that there aren't real democratic issues and real reforms that need to be carried out inside of China and Hong Kong. There certainly are. And some of the grievances, the smaller ones down the list, are actually legitimate criticisms and needs that people have that are going unfulfilled. Now, specifically with the great wealth divide that's in the country. However, the vast majority of this movement is about being backed by the U.S. to force their interests into the country. And the legitimate needs of people, which are not the focus here, are being subverted for the purposes of U.S. power. And that is what actually has to be stopped here. That is why this has suddenly become such a big deal. China has cracked down on these groups receiving such money from the National Endowment for Democracy, and that organization should be stopped at all costs. Unfortunately, they don't feel the need to just radically crack down on that one organization. They're just handling the current protests in a very strong-handed manner, as they have done so in the past. This Occupy Central movement is nothing more than a farce. It is a creation by the United States and possibly the UK as well, with the deliberate intent of subverting Chinese interests inside their own borders. And that's exactly what this is about. Now, I'm not particularly a fan of the Chinese government, but I do stand with any country's right to self-determination, and that is what they do have here. Hong Kong has the right to its own self-determination, just as China does. It does not deserve to have it subverted by the United States just to serve U.S. imperial interests. One thing that should be kept in note, most of all, is that this largely wouldn't be a problem had China just, continued to be socialist. In a socialist society, particularly the one under Mao, this would never have been tolerated. There would never have been an opportunity for, foreign companies or foreign powers, like what the U.S. is doing, to just come in and subvert everything for their own interests. Such a thing would never be tolerated. I'm not particularly a fan of the multi-party system, and I have my own criticisms of New Democracy, which, on the whole, I actually disagree with. But the point here is, if China were to return to the socialist path, this could be avoided. and the influence of the United States could be removed from the country. When you have a capitalist class in a country, they are going to carry out their own interests, even if it's counter to the nation itself. And particularly so if it's counter to the needs and the desires, the livelihoods of the regular people inside the country. These students, like many students, don't realize that they're actually being used by a Western power. This is not unlike the right-wing student movements in Venezuela, who are wholly owned subsidiaries of the United States government. Now, this situation is different. Of course, just as every situation is different. This one has been tremendously peaceful on the side of the protesters, and they have not all necessarily been right-wing people, even liberals, conservatives, all kinds of types, merely calling for this democratic reform. But this democratic reform has the specific intent of undermining the country. Had there been a restoration of socialism, had socialism actually been brought to Hong Kong, and we could have a people's democracy, once again, this situation would never have happened. This is one of those contradictions that would have been taken care of. And it is nothing more than a reminder of why it is always right to rebel against reactionaries, and why socialism really is the only way forward. Thank you for watching. Please comment and rate the video. If you liked it, hit subscribe or check out some of these other great videos. If you wish, share it on social media. While you're at it, why don't you follow me on Twitter? And if you got time, go on over to the MRN bookstore and check out some of the latest books available.